Welcome everyone to the fourth edition of the Tech4Eva Roadshow, today featuring the United States as a potential location for the future of Femtech. My name is Alicia Evangelista, and I'm the head of innovation here at Swissnex in Boston. We are partnered with Tech4Eva to bring this event to you today and to also bring a few interesting panels that will hopefully expand your worldview of what is happening in Femtech. The first and foremost, I'd like to thank today our sponsors and partners. This event could not have been made possible without them. I'm just going to pull up a share screen. Thank you, Simon. So Tech4Eva is the impetus behind this event. You'll hear a little bit more about them in a little bit. We also are coming to you from Swissnex in Boston. We are the Swiss Science and Technology Consulate located in the East Coast of the United States. We're also supported by a number of other participants, including Joyance Partners here in Boston and a number of Swiss organizations, including InnoSwiss, who you'll also hear from later today. A note about what our agenda is. So we're trying to pack a lot of information into the next 2 hours, and we hope that you'll be able to follow along with us. There will be a few guest speakers today, including who I'll introduce next. We'll also learn a little bit from 15 incredible startups who are going to be presenting their work to you in rapid popcorn style. And we have two exciting panels, one focusing on towards equity in women's health research, and the second on finding investment in the USA and the road to IPO. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Benjamin Bulman, the CEO of Swissnex in Boston and New York, and he will give you a welcome to the program and also an introduction to our special speakers. With that, I'll hand it over to Benjamin.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Welcome everyone to our special event on fostering equity in health. My name is Benjamin Bulman. I'm the CEO of Swissnex in Boston and New York. Swissnex is a global network of science and technology hubs established by Switzerland abroad. We have 6 dedicated offices throughout the world, Boston, San Francisco, Bangalore, Rio, Shanghai, and now also Osaka in Japan, as well as 19 science counselors in different Swiss embassies throughout the world. Our mission is, so to say, to help unlock the potential of education, research, and innovation to meet the challenges of our time. Swissnex, as a nexus, does that through connecting people, connecting ideas, connecting resources across geographies, across disciplines, across different sectors, and importantly, by turning those connections into collaborations. And that's precisely why we are here today. We are connecting Switzerland and the US in the domain of Femtech and women's health. Today, you will hear from 3 very special guests who are visiting us here in Boston from Switzerland. First of all, it's a great honor for us to have among us Switzerland's State Secretary for Education, Research and Innovation, Martina Hirayama. She is, so to say, the Swiss Minister of Education, Research and Innovation, in charge of all national and international policies in these areas. The State Secretary is accompanied here in Boston by the presidents of our 2 most important national agencies to support and fund research and innovation in Switzerland. We have Matthias Egger among us, the president of the Swiss National Science Foundation, as well as André Kudelski, the president of the Swiss Innovation Agency, InnoSwiss. So we are very grateful to have them for this event. Before we go on into more content about women's health, I would like to invite the State Secretary for short welcome remarks. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of Swissnex, it's a great pleasure for me to be here with you in Boston and to witness firsthand the region's world-class academic, scientific and entrepreneurial ecosystem. It is a particular honor to open today's event, providing an important look into Femtech and women's health. Equality of opportunities is a cornerstone value for Switzerland. In fact, the concept is written in our constitution. We have robust protections against all major forms of discrimination, including gender. And we take seriously the idea that all people in Switzerland should have the same chances to succeed. Increasingly, Switzerland and the world recognize that keeping women healthy and empowering them to take control of their health is crucial to equity. While Switzerland has taken some critical steps in the right direction, further improvements are still possible and remaining challenges must be tackled. Female subjects have historically been excluded from toxicological or biomedical research for a variety of reasons. Also, women react differently to drugs than men. The gender factor is still often not taken into account in research. Events like the one today help shape our understanding of women's health and Femtech and bring us closer to building the ecosystem that will best support the health of all people fairly. Switzerland can be proud of its heritage in research and entrepreneurship. Switzerland is strong in pharma, medical devices, and diagnostics, and has been ranked among the world's most innovative countries in the world for the last decade. Switzerland also exhibits complementary strengths in artificial intelligence and precision engineering, which enable innovative approaches to medical needs and bring fresh talent and eyes to age-old problems. But Switzerland has only just begun to leverage this healthy leadership to create initiatives specific for women's health initiatives like the Women's Brain Project, a transdisciplinary non-profit organization founded by Swiss scientists towards understanding the effects of sex and gender on brain diseases and mental health. We also recognize the effect of the caretaker mindset on the quality of women's healthcare with programs like the University of Lausanne's gender bias training for medical students. And Switzerland continues to be one of the largest contributors to UN Women, the United Nations entity dedicated to gender equality and women's empowerment, which also considers women's access to healthcare, sexual health education, and reproductive health. Switzerland is also home to some impactful Femtech companies, including big names like Ava Women and some of the startups you will hear from today, SPVix, Mom Diagnostics, Move On Therapeutics, Testimate, and Anaida. We also are host to an ecosystem of investors and non-profit organizations, including our universities, who have made it part of their mission to lift up women's health. Today, we join Tech4Eva, Switzerland's first accelerator for Femtech, run out of Epf Innovation Park and Swissnex in Boston, to take a glimpse at the entrepreneur tackling key issues in women's health. We will also hear the US perspective on fundamental women's health research and the key issues of funding these Femtech efforts. Thank you for joining us today as we explore these important issues and bring visibility to Femtech. With that, I'm pleased to hand over to Lan-Su Gile, Deputy Managing Director of the EPFL Innovation Park and Co-Director of Tech4Eva, who is joining us from Lausanne, Switzerland. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the warm introductions. Good morning and afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone in US and in Switzerland and around the globe. It's my great pleasure to talk about Tech4Eva initiatives and the program that we have been developing during this Boston Roadshow. Tech4Eva is a joint initiative of Goldman and Epf Internet Park with the ambition to create an innovative platform in Switzerland for high potential Femtech entrepreneurs, researchers, and corporate innovators around the world to join force in order to advance, to disrupt, to improve technology and solutions related to women's health and well-being. Next slide, please. Next one. For those of you who are not familiar with Swiss innovation systems, there are actually also not very familiar with Epf Internet Park. Actually, it is a major science park of Switzerland, located in the campus of Swiss Federal Institute of Technology of Lausanne. It hosts around 200 companies, of which 150 are high-tech startups and 26 innovation units of large corporations such as Nestle, Cisco, Agilent, Merck, etc. It offers a wide portfolio of service, including flexible office, startup training, coaching, incubation, acceleration for national and international entrepreneurs and innovators, in collaboration with a dynamic community of industry experts, business angels and VCs, governmental agencies, etc. In addition, EPFL Innovation Park is building competence centers and business cluster around digital trust, edtech, sport tech, food tech, and recently Femtech. Next slide. I will invite our partner, Mutuel, to talk about Mutuel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lan. My name is Xenia Tugay, and I'm a strategic innovation expert at Mutuel, and also I'm helping with the Tech4Eva program. It's a great pleasure to be here. Just in a few words, who is Mutuel? We are a leading health insurance in Switzerland. We have roughly 1 million individual policyholders who have our health insurances. To give you an idea, the population of Switzerland is 8 million people, and we also have 24,000 corporate clients where we support more on everything related to accident and employee sick leave.
Thank you. Next slide. Well, there are, for those of you who are not familiar with the term Femtech, actually it refers to technology and solutions designed to enhance women's overall wellness, period and pelvic health, fertility, quality of life during pregnancy and menopause. These solutions could take the forms of wearables, diagnostics, drugs, therapeutics, medical device, mobile app, etc. Next one. There are several reasons why we have launched this initiative. Apart from the reason that's mentioned already by our state secretary, there are some other reasons. Women made up 51% of the population. Their health and well-being have a huge impact on the family, on the workplace, and the society. Providing funding and support to innovative solutions for women's health and well-being is also an effective way to support their professional life and to maximize their impact on the society. Secondly, women are underrepresented in the research and clinical trials, and there is less evidence and data on how conditions affect women differently. And this could impact on the health outcome for women. And for some diseases, women are more likely to be misdiagnosed than men. Femtech is also a very fast-growing market that is currently underfinanced, despite its considerable potential. Today, only 4% of tech investment in life sciences is aimed for women's health tech solutions. On the other hand, over 60% of Femtech founders are women, compared to 10 to 15% of women founders in the high-tech startup space. Therefore, boosting Femtech startups has a dual impact on women's health as well as women's leadership in high-tech entrepreneurship. Xenia?
And as for us, I mean, only can echo everything that Lan said, but as well, 50% of our clients are women, and it's very important for us to develop good prevention programs for them. We have 3,000 employees, and over 60% of them are women. So we're also interested to explore the solutions that can support them in things like menopause, for example, or support their pregnancy journeys and overall well-being at work. Might be also linked something to the period pain. And of course, we have the corporate customers, and here we're also interested how we can bring solutions to them.
Thank you, Xenia. So the mission of Tech4Eva is, first of all, to further raise awareness, promote equity in health research, to accelerate the growth of Femtech startups, and to increase their visibilities for potential customers and investors, to identify, promote, and co-create concrete Femtech solutions, and to foster and engage the community with not only women, but also men. So we built this initiative with the philosophy that we offer our equity-free help to all high-potential startup, Femtech startup companies. This initiative is currently supported by the combined financial resources and industrial insight of Groupe Mutuel, with the experience and track record of Epf Internet Park to bring startups to success. We operate with a model of corporate and startup partnership by involving senior corporate experts as well as successful Femtech startup founders as mentors to provide startup with access to potential customer and business partners. I'm extremely pleased to see top female executives as well as a male executive in the large life science company to come as a mentor, such as Merck, the Biopharm, Ferring, Felix, and so on. We also leverage our international network, in particular Swissnex, to facilitate access to other markets and to bring this initiative to other countries. Next slide. So thanks to the support of our partners, we got 110 applications coming from different parts of the world for this first edition of Tech4Eva, of which 33 are Swiss startups and 65% are all the founders are women. Next ones. So Tech4Eva is meant to be inclusive. Well, we select 15 growth startups and 15 early stage startups into 2 different cohorts with the distinguished and tailor-made program. We also invite all the applicants as well as researchers and Femtech enthusiasts to join our community and participate in the networking and open innovation activities in full vertical focus group to address unmet needs. Next slide. Here is a quick overview of the 3 distinguished activity streams in parallel with respective objectives and participant group. Some of these activities, such as specialized workshop, thematic roadshows, focus group discussion, are open to public. That these activities are announced on our website, Tech4Eva, and I invite you to follow. Next ones. So thanks to Swissnex Boston, today Roadshow is helping us to extend our network towards the community of researchers working on women's health and in particular in health equity. Through the Roadshow, we are also expecting to get connected to Boston area startup ecosystems that bring potential customer, business partner, and investors to meet our Tech4Eva startups. Next ones. Tech4Eva at its original form is a Femtech accelerator, but it has broader scope and ambition. Going forward, we would like to extend the Tech4Eva platform to include academic research on women's health and to facilitate the funding. We aim to foster collaboration between academia, corporates, and startups and become one day a national thematic network with wide international outreach. We warmly invite you, the audience in Boston and around the globe, to get connected with us through today's roadshow, and especially with our Tech4Eva startups that are presenting today. We would like to explore with you new opportunities of innovation and to grow this innovative initiative into a strong international endeavor. Next one. So anyone interested can join us on social media through these channels. And for those of you who are here who would like to have a first conversation, you can reach me via chat today or write us at Epf-Innovationpark.ch. Thank you.
Thank you, Lan, and thank you for that wonderful introduction to Tech4Eva. I've already introduced myself, but I will be your host for today. And I think moving along, it is my great pleasure to talk a little bit more about the startups that we'll be featuring today. So Lan mentioned that there are 2 different cohorts of startups that they are supporting. The early stage startups are listed here. We will not hear from them today, but if you are interested, please contact Lan to learn more about how to support them. We will be hearing, though, from our later stage startups, which are featured here. One by one, they'll present to you in 1-minute flash style, and you'll be able to get a feel for what these amazing startups are working on. With that, let's launch our first startup introduction.
I'm Ana Luisa, and I'm the founder of Impli. What makes implantables great is that you can really closely monitor from the interstitial fluid. And where we want to act first is combating and understanding hormone profiles of women. And looking at the IVF sector, where frequent monitoring of hormone levels is very common and very necessary in order to create precise treatments and then increase the precision and safety of IVF cycles. And we do this with our small implantable biosensors that we have. These devices are about 16 millimeters by 2 millimeters wide and play directly into a smartphone. These sensors measure estradiol, progesterone, luteinizing hormone, and that increases convenience, precision, and safety of women. We're currently in the process of completing our manufacturing plan and executing the first manufacturing of this. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Anna Panigasi for Metabolomic Diagnostics. This is me on the right. Every day all over the world, women and babies still suffer and die from preeclampsia. I joined this team because we have the best technology for predicting it. The resolution for preeclampsia is to deliver the baby sometimes too early and with severe complications. When we do know who's at risk, there are known interventions that can improve outcomes. Using one of the largest biobanks of blood samples and a world-class team, we have invested over 8 million euro in developing a highly effective screening test. This is Prepsia. We have signed a letter of intent with a test lab to bring Prepsia to the market in the USA within 7 to 10 months. That event will be the first commercial output of our deep technology pipeline. We are raising 1.9 million euro to bring this test to market and be highly profitable within 24 months. Prepsia is a reality and it is transforming maternal health. Thank you.
I'm Matthias Wipp, CEO and co-founder of Mom Diagnostics. We care about the health of pregnant women, and our first test in development is a rapid diagnostic test for preeclampsia. Preeclampsia causes around 500,000 infant and 75,000 maternal deaths every year. Of that, it causes a huge economic burden. So early and accurate identification of preeclampsia is crucial to minimize complications. We are developing a rapid blood test, which is used during routine pregnancy checkups at the doctor's office. So the test is very easy to use. It's a drop of blood loaded onto a single-use cartridge, and in combination with our handheld reader, the doctors have the result ready within a few minutes. So our solution is to improve the diagnosis and thereby save costs for the healthcare system and save lives. Please contact me if you're interested to learn more. Thank you very much.
My name is Diana Moore, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mugan Therapeutics. Stress urinary incontinence is a disease that affects over 200 million people worldwide. Every fourth woman is affected after childbirth, and the dark numbers of the taboo disease are much higher. SUI represents a huge economic burden to both healthcare and society, and the comorbidities are numerous, ranging from infections through isolation, even up to severe depression. Having no optimal satisfactory solution on the market, I decided to take the chance of translating what I learned during my PhD into a real life-changing solution with the mission to advance a personalized cell therapy platform for skeletal muscle regeneration. My team of experienced researchers and physicians managed a successful translation of the process from the bench to the clinic, supported by €6.5 million by the European Commission, bringing a brighter future to all silently suffering patients in need. Thank you, Alad.
My name is Jaji. I'm head of content and premium business at PregLife. And PregLife is the #1 baby and pregnancy app in Northern Europe. We know that the connection between parents and kid in the beginning is very important to how the kid grows. So we want to give the tools for families to be able to get this connection early on. Right now we are in 10 markets and we're going to keep expanding, but our biggest markets are Poland, Sweden, and Germany. So right now, content is the core of our app. We have a huge team of midwives and experts that creates all of this content. So have a bunch of features like supporting this period. And of course, we have many other projects ongoing to improve our user experience in the app, which is premium content, expansion of free content, and improvements with UX and UI. And currently, we have thousands of great reviews on the App Store and Google Play. Please contact us if you feel that's something that I said is very interesting. Thank you very much.
So my name is Shivina. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Testmate Health. And today I want to talk about quite an unsexy topic, and that's sexually transmitted diseases. Rates of STDs are rising globally, and there is still no rapid and easy test that can be done quickly to diagnose these common STDs, such as chlamydia and gonorrhea. For example, chlamydia and gonorrhea today are the leading infective causes of infertility, but the treatment is so simple with a simple dose of antibiotics. The technology to achieve this is complex and it crosses multiple scientific disciplines, and we combine 3 breakthrough innovations in order to achieve our product. If we compare this to others, such as Everlywell, Let's Get Checked, their version of self-testing still needs you to post samples to a lab for processing. We're supported by government grants, and we recently closed our first seed funding round, which was VC-backed. So for anyone who's interested, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and we can set up a call. Thank you very much.
I'm Andrew Tasker. I'm the CEO and founder of Viveka Biomed, and I'd like to introduce our new product, Contrail Active Guard, which is a bladder support for women to address stress urinary incontinence. It's inserted into the vagina in a similar way to a tampon, though it works very differently. And the core differential about Contrail is it's designed to stop leakage. Totally non-invasive, drug-free, and we've got 7 clinical trials that support its efficacy. And women can either use it just during exercise or up to 16 hours a day. As a business, this is a Class 2A medical device. We have got our CE mark, and we actually launched the UK market, and we're already looking to launch into Europe. We secured a listing with Boots. We do believe there's an opportunity for healthcare reimbursement as well, and we've made a UK drug tariff application. It really means that women can get back into exercise and with all the other health benefits of it. Thank you very much.
It's Data Science for Women's Health. I'm Lawrence Fontino, CEO and co-founder of WOM. Our solution is an AI-powered daily women's health tracker. On one hand, we help women during the different stages of their life, but we also work and partner with the health industry to provide insight and also a premium version of WOM. WOM collects more than 100 parameters, and with our algorithms, we deliver predictions on the fertile windows, the next cycles, and the pregnancies. We also deliver personalized tips and then a powerful community. Our machine learning is unique. On one hand, we use ML to design predictive models. And then lastly, we have a premium SaaS for the health industry, for insurers, and then femcare and consumer health. We are present in 9 countries. And then in terms of monetization, we are 32,000 MRR in Q1. Our core business model is a SaaS for brands targeting female audiences. For example, we launched with Mafre, a global insurer in 2 countries in Latin America, a special version of WOM for them. Please contact with us if you're interested to talk.
I'm Ana Luisa, and I'm the founder of Implicit. What makes them?
What a wonderful group of startups. We'll hear from 7 more later. But for now, we are going to turn our attention toward women's health research. So it is my great pleasure to introduce a special guest who is joining us in Boston today. We have Dr. Matthias Egger. He is the president of the National Research Council at the Swiss National Science Foundation. Matthias, whenever you're ready, we're interested to hear from you.
Okay, hi. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce this panel. The topic is very close to my heart, both in terms of the Swiss National Science Foundation, but also as a clinical and public health epidemiologist. So at the Swiss National Science Foundation, we have two issues. One is that women among our applicants are underrepresented. Switzerland's not doing well in gender equity in the higher education sector. It's sort of average. So about 24% of full professors are women. So we want to make sure that this participation increases. And also in the research that we fund, it's very important to us that gender-related aspects are actually considered, that gender differences, if they are likely to exist, are actually examined in the studies that we fund, so that a sufficient number of women are included in these studies, so that stratified analyses can be done and gender differences can be assessed, so that we don't have the situation which we've had for many years, that studies mainly conducted in men produce results that are then applied to women, and we've seen some cases where that really hasn't worked, and we need gender-specific data on the efficacy of drugs, on the side effects, etc. So without further ado, I'm handing back to Alicia, and again, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have somebody who understands what we're working on, what we're working to change. And now it's my great pleasure to also introduce our three panelists for our first panel. Today, we're going to be focusing on the arc of women's health research in the United States, focusing on past policies, practices that brought us to where we are today, and the efforts and progress or processes that will take us into the future. And so we've invited three leading voices to join us. The first is Dr. Roxanna Maran, who is a professor of medicine and the director of the Interventional Cardiovascular Research and Clinical Trials at the Zena and Michael A. Wiener Cardiovascular Institute at Mount Sinai School of Medicine. And more importantly, Dr. Maran is currently leading the Lancet Commission on Women's Cardiovascular Diseases. This commission brings together leading female researchers from around the world who have clinical expertise in cardiovascular medicine, and they identify and bridge gaps in research and care for women in cardiovascular diseases. Our second panelist is Dr. Krista Moss. She is VP of Clinical and Payer Strategy at Maven Clinic. Maven is the largest virtual clinic in the women and families health space. As part of her role at Maven, she leads their clinical research and outcomes team. And prior to joining Maven, she led multiple efforts on the design and implementation of value-based payment models, including those in the maternity space and Medicaid, and developed a passion for improving outcomes and member experiences in maternal health. And last but not least, we have Dr. Nikki Vaidovic, who is an assistant professor at Northwestern's Feinberg School of Medicine. Her research explores sex and gender-inclusive research practices and is inextricable link to gender inclusion within the biomedical workforce. She's an advocate for women's health research and is actively changing the landscape through science policy and public engagement with science. I'd like to welcome our three speakers to our virtual stage, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation about what is happening in the United States in women's health research and where we might be going. So the first question that I have that I'm going to ask you all is, can you discuss the state of women's health research in the US and maybe in general, and why it's important to discuss women's health separately from men's health? Who would like to take a first cut at this?
I'm happy to start if that works.
That would be great.
Thank you first for having me on this wonderful panel, and I'm just so excited to see that all the work that you are doing in bringing women forward and women's health, making it a very, very important priority. And as everyone has discussed, as women make up over 50% of the population in the world, yet they are not well represented, not just in our clinical trials, but also from the research that we have done very deeply and very systemically. We have found that there is a systemic underrepresentation, undertreatment, underdiagnosis, and underreporting of women in not just cardiovascular trials, but in a lot of other trials that make the basis for our guidelines. So if in particular, if I can just talk about cardiovascular disease, which is the #1 cause of death for women and men in the United States, in 2016, 1.2 million women died of heart disease. And of those, 412,000 were from cardiovascular disease. And if you take the next 8 causes of death, COPD, cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, and other cancers, even GYN cancers, and you add them all up, those numbers still pale in comparison to the 400,000+ women who die every year from cardiovascular disease. Yet, women are underrepresented in clinical trials, sex-specific data is underreported, and especially when you see that there's legislation that has been passed in the United States in 1980 and 1990s to mandate the inclusion of women in clinical trials, we're seeing that they continue to be underrepresented, which all limits the potential for developing the very important sex-specific strategies and recommendations, not just for cardiovascular disease, but for pretty much everything else that's out there that inflicts women.
Thank you. Nikki, I see you chomping at the bit to add to that. I know you have a lot of historical perspective, so maybe you can give us a little bit more of a feel for why we're where we are.
So first off, thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel today, and I'm really delighted to participate in this endeavor. So I think from my perspective, I'm a biochemist by training. And so I'd like to share my experiences with you that extend beyond just clinical research, that this is really a detrimental problem that begins at the bench in our most basic science research, looking at cells and animals. And what many people don't seem to be aware of is the fact that the majority of our basic science research, those being done on cells and animals, is conducted in a predominantly male model. So even in the very early stages of drug design and development of therapeutics, we're taking this information and translating it to clinical research from the basis of a male-focused perspective. And so, I think this really has set up our pipeline for women's health research to have huge gaps in knowledge. And while we are making some improvements towards sex and gender inclusion in research, we are still not there. For example, in the United States, it wasn't until 1993, per literally an act of Congress, the NIH Revitalization Act, that required the inclusion of women in clinical research. And then later, it wasn't until 2016, which is just a few short years ago, that the National Institutes of Health implemented a policy asking federally funded investigators to consider sex as a biological variable in their experimental designs, analyses, and reporting. So we're seeing that while there is a trend toward inclusion of women and females in research, there is still a large gap in the sex and gender-based analyses, which hinder our understanding of how sex impacts health and disease.
Thank you. And Krista, I know you're in a more traditional female health space. How are you seeing this affecting maternal patients?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in terms of, the fact that I think this is even more exacerbated when we look at pregnant women and inclusion in research. They're generally excluded from clinical trials, even though this is not something that's codified by law. And there's been a lot of work to show that pregnant women shouldn't be considered a vulnerable population as we think about protocols and studies, but rather a complex population instead, to try to work towards protecting pregnant people through research rather than from research as we look at specific studies. Despite this, though, just to highlight a couple of stats here, almost 3/4 of the drugs approved by the FDA since 2000 have no data on their impact on human pregnancy. It on average takes 27 years for a drug approved in the US to move from the undetermined category for use in pregnancy to some more specific risk categorization. So this is just still a very, kind of underrepresented area. And I think, to speak for the need for that shift, beyond just impact from a research perspective, there's also the experience and interactions with the healthcare system, right? We know that, women roughly make not only 95% of their own healthcare decisions, but also 60% of decisions for others, right? So they're making more than 3/4 of the healthcare decisions in the US. And often pregnancy and delivery is really someone's first major interaction with the healthcare system. So when we think about engagement and what that means, in terms of longstanding impact on how people are engaging with the healthcare system, this is just a meaningful opportunity for change.
Yeah, fantastic. I wonder, so we talked a little bit about the policy decisions that have been put into place to include women in trials and even in earlier research. And I know that there's good intentions and then there's what's actually happening. Can we talk a little bit about how these impacts are being measured and whether these policies are actually working both at the bench phase and also the clinical phase?
Well, I can speak into what I just saw at the American Heart Association last week, where a federally funded trial enrolled 94% male patient population with valvular heart disease. Really important clinical question. We see it often in women, and yet they in the New England Journal, they did say that they failed, even though they worked hard to enroll women. And I believe that in the commission that we put forth, we put some recommendations. We can't just keep talking about the underrepresentation unless we do something about it. And our feeling is that we have to be more inclusive rather than exclusive, removing the age barriers, removing the idea that the women of childbearing age should not be part of this because in case they should get pregnant. We absolutely have to understand what's going on because these are the same patients that we have to treat for which we have absolutely no data for. And I think these are the kinds of things that we said. And we said that if you want women who make decisions not just for themselves, but the entire family, and they're often always putting everyone else first, they need to be educated. And we have to go to where they are. We need to go to communities, the white towers and big academic centers, the ones that I live in, the ones that Nicole comes from, are not the places to enroll as tertiary referral centers, enrolling the women that we absolutely see in our clinical practices. And I think it's very important to go to where they are frequented. And also providing very, very important resources for women who do enroll in clinical trials like childcare and transportation for their follow-up studies. All of those are the kinds of things we recommended as actions to be taken in the next decade to change this paradigm of underrepresentation of women. And unfortunately, legislation itself isn't going to make it because what we're seeing is these funders are giving the money still to the same people who are not enrolling women, who are designing trials that are not inclusive. And so we're hoping that some level of a metric that absolutely then there's a pushback in not giving funding to those organizations who are not working to enroll women, who do not have a track record, should be implemented.
So that's some of the work that I've been focusing on, where is how can we track the science of women's health research and track these metrics such as sex and gender inclusion and sex and gender-based analyses. And through that, I think there is really one crucial gap in taking a step back. And this is really an economic issue that not only to, as Roxanna mentioned, provide funding and support for childcare for women enrolled in clinical trials, et cetera. This goes back to the benchtop, essentially, in that if we want to start building our drug and therapeutic pipeline tailored towards improving women's health research, we need to specifically invest in women's health research. So I'll provide a brief example. The organization Women's Health Access Matters published a report recently this year looking at the economic returns of supporting women's health research. So for example, and I want to take this outside of the context of women's reproductive health. Alzheimer's disease cost the US economy $305 billion in 2020, whereas women are 66% of patients, yet only 12% of research dollars specifically focus on women. So if we were to triple our investment in women's in Alzheimer's research that is specifically directed towards women, so adding 280 million would generate 930 million in returns to the economy. And so we're getting that money back in terms of quality of life, workforce, healthcare savings. And so I think having a targeted approach to plug these gaps in funding for women's health research will be beneficial to the health of all people, but also spur a line of researchers and scientists and clinicians to then dedicate their time and research efforts towards women's health research.
And that study had some outsized return on investment. I want to highlight again, we're talking about thousands of % of return on investment by focusing studies on women. So this is not a case of it not being a good economic investment to do this type of research. But I noticed that all of you also talked about there being an awareness and education. And I think I want to go over to Krista for a second and understand a little bit more about what Maven is seeing, Maven Clinic is seeing in terms of how women understand the healthcare system and whether they're empowered to actually make their decisions. Do you think there's an opportunity there to have more advocacy through empowered women during their healthcare meetings, their healthcare practitioner appointments, et cetera? And would that have an impact on where the research dollars go?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that this is something that's also coming to light more just in terms of vaccine hesitancy and what we're seeing specifically among pregnant women in the US. So we actually did a study where we surveyed 500 representative pregnant women across the country to really look at and understand, how many had gotten the vaccine and if, what was the rationale behind getting it or not getting it. And I think what we did see is a lot of kind of mixed education, mixed feedback in terms of, what they should be doing from different healthcare providers, right? Even personally, have a woman on my team who's pregnant, 3 different providers told her 3 different things in terms of whether she should get boosted or not, right? So just even anecdotally, we're seeing that. And so one of the things that we are really trying to do is increase education, increase advocacy and empowerment from the standpoint of, people really, kind of understanding the literature and education and being able to bring that to their interactions with the healthcare system. And I think ultimately this is shedding light to Nikki's point on some of the bench research as well, just in terms of, kind of recommendations for going back to, animal research and not only including more, females, but also pregnant lab animals in some of this research. There was, recently working group recommendations, I think because of, what has been brought to the surface with vaccine hesitancy in the US with COVID.
The idea of the working groups is interesting. I see an increase in the number of research groups that are focusing on women, and it seems to be women leading women. And so I also want to talk a little bit about what the workforce needs to look like in order to be able to enable women's health research to really be spotlighted, but also to be understood, because I think it is quite difficult to really internalize that there is a very big difference between the way that women experience disease and men experience disease. And so I know that all of you have done some work on inclusion and representation. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what do your colleagues look like at this point in terms of women versus men? And what sort of efforts have you seen to try and improve the representation in the workforce in general?
So women make up approximately 30% of the scientific and engineering workforce in the United States. And so that also varies by discipline. And so in the life sciences, you tend to have more women compared to, say, computer sciences. However, we're seeing that this underrepresentation of women in the biomedical sciences specifically may have impacts on what research questions are being asked and what data is being analyzed. So there are some emerging studies that are showing that the gender of a researcher will determine whether or not their data will be analyzed by sex. And it's skewing that women are more likely to include and analyze their data by sex compared to men. And so, this is something I'm interested in exploring, how whether women are just inherently more aware of how sex affects health and disease than men, or that just the traditional model of male is default human persists in biomedicine, and in the fact that men have dominated this field for so long that is just status quo, and our trainees are being taught that this is the way that it's always been done. So I'm interested to hear Roxanna's perspective from the clinical side.
Well, Nicole, you hit the nail right on the head. And if I share with you the statistics in cardiology, it's astounding. In cardiovascular disease, if we look at our trainees in medical school, just medical school, over 50% of the medical school graduates are women. When we look at internal medicine, 47% are women going into internal medicine residency programs. When we get to cardiovascular disease, that number dwindles down to 25%. And if you look 10 years out, how are women practicing cardiology? It's under 20%, somewhere between 15 to 18%. In interventional cardiology, which is my subspecialty, I'm an interventional cardiologist. I put in stents, I perform procedures. It's under 4%. So what's happening? Where is this pipeline, the leaking pipeline of talented women? And I'll tell you, it has a lot to do with lack of leadership positions for women, which is across the board for all of medicine, not just in cardiology, but all over medicine, biomedical sciences. You just couldn't go through it. I've done a lot of research. I've published probably about 20 papers on this. And what you find is that there are associate professors, assistant professors, and instructors. You really could do a linear relationship. More women as instructors and assistant professors. As soon as you go to associate professors, males pick up those chairs. On the professors, women become under 20%. As chiefs of cardiology or chiefs of section chiefs, almost not there. Deans, almost not there. So in what way would a woman who has to work and train for 12 straight years after medical school to become an interventionalist has any hope or any kind of a enthusiasm towards a field that's dominated by males, that's studied by the fact that she will work hard and she will remain as an assistant professor if she stays in academics, and if she goes into private practice, she will be sent to some outlying clinic seeing general cardiology and lipids and general medicine so that she can bring procedures to her male colleagues. This is what's going on in America, and it is a absolute unbelievable blasphemy is how I call it, because it is really, really an inflection point where we are today, that we know that when you have women at the table, when you have women, and the workforce has to represent what that population looks like that you're treating, that our patients do not trust these white males that coming up to them and saying, please come into my research. And we're seeing over and over again that when you go to women's health, then it becomes populated for women. And why is it that if you want to do heart disease in women, all of the people who are taking care of them are women, but yet we don't have enough women who are cardiologists who could take care of these women? So it's just such a circular argument. And it's unfortunate because I do believe that now academic medical centers have put all these legislations or metrics in place, but they're checking boxes, and it's not at all in depth, and it's not truly looking forward to bringing in the right women at the right time to the right place, promoting the talent. Because you know what? If you look at their funding and their P&L statements, how much is put for D&I is how you can tell if they really are devoted to this. And it's usually the least funded and completely ignored area of their expenditure. And so it tells you that while they say they care, until we put some metric that puts the US World News a scorecard for whether or not you actually are embracing D&I in your institution, and that's how you become the best hospital for cardiology, the best hospital for neuroscience, etc., will you then be actually making a difference? I don't want to keep going on and dominate this conversation, because as you could see, it really turns, it's just such a frustrating arena. And I didn't even touch on macro and microaggressions for women in the workplace, the toxic work environment that is there, the lack of understanding of family responsibilities that men also have now, and our inability to embrace this in a really good way is what frustrates me the most. And until we get there, we are not going to make any impact on improving not just cardiovascular health, but women's health in general.
And I just want to build on something Roxanna mentioned in terms of trust, and what this means from the standpoint of, patients being able to build trusted relationships. I mean, my training was in biomedical engineering, and then I went into management consulting. So of course, very much fields dominated by men, have transitioned now to maternal health, and things look quite different. And, in terms of diversity, this is something that we look at quite a lot in terms of our provider network and how we're able to really support our members. And, beyond just gender, but also, roughly 40% of our provider network is BIPOC. And we really see that, care matching and being able to match members with providers of specific races or ethnicities has really been demonstrated to improve outcomes, specifically in maternal health. And so, this is one area where we're continuing to pursue research and really want to continue to do more.
I just also wanted to, I know you want to go on to the next topic, Alicia, but let me just basically say about the not-for-profit organization that I have founded because of my frustration. It's called Women as One, and it really is an organization that is actually working to promote talented women in medicine and to help them gain the stage they deserve, and making important matching programs for them, and embracing the fact that they are talented and yet under-recognized. And we're really kind of putting private-public partnership to try to get these women at least the opportunities that they so deserve. And so we are working very hard. We've been 2 years out, and we have several programs, escalator, climb programs, etc. And it's been extremely successful. And we now are working with our societies to be sure that our scientific meetings are not studded with panels of males. We call those manels. And we no longer want to see a single one of those, because they say, well, there aren't enough women in cardiology. But I think we believe that if you look, the talented women are there. They're just behind the scenes doing all the work. They're in the trenches doing all the work. So we are really focusing on that. And we're hoping to make some kind of a dent on this important problem.
So I just kind of want to close the loop on this then. Until we have gender parity in the biomedical workforce, I don't think we're going to see any improvement in women's health research unless there is a huge cultural or financial or economic shift in order to do so, or if there's some sort of more aggressive regulatory mechanisms in order to essentially force the hand of investigators to comply. So I think that's where this issue is. If they're not separate, we need to be talking about the representation of women in science and medicine alongside the fact that it's coupled to the types of research studies we do, how we analyze our data, so on and so forth. So I think that's really the take home I would like to share with everyone here today.
Yeah, and that's actually the point that I was going to break into before is, Roxanna, you mentioned this vicious circle. We don't have enough representation of females in the early stage and also in the clinical, and therefore we don't study things that are important to women's health. Do you think, this is a question to all three of you, do you think that it is a matter of legislation that changes this? Is it a matter of funding and who is on the funding committees or the grant panels? Is it everything, or where do you start to attack this problem so that there will be a change in 5-10 years?
I mean, I think it's all things, and Nicole really touched on one of the most important aspects. We've seen that women scientists, when how hard is it to become a biomedical scientist as a woman? It's extremely difficult and yet when their papers come, they get much higher, much more difficult. Reviewer 2 will go on. There'll be like 14 pages of remarks, and we know that there is implicit bias there, that they believe, and that no one is. There's so much to do that I believe that all of us need constant implicit bias training. That there needs to be legislation. That we need to have a whole different social construct for women, that they shouldn't be just expected to be the people in the home. And we now know that this is changing. The next generation, I mean, one of the great things about the millennials is, I believe, that empowerment of women will help them, hopefully, to find partners that are also partnering in parental care. I don't know if you know about the UK program that's called Athena Swan. I don't know how many of you know about that, but it's a wonderful program where not only are you not going to be given grants if you don't have enough women, or that there aren't women scientists or women investigators in there, but also it's a very important family leave policies that puts it in a series. In other words, you basically give a woman whatever time she wants off, and then followed by the spouse, to also have the time off to be at home so she can return to work. In the previous past, the Europeans were given 3 years or something of protected leave. No woman wants to stay home 3 years after she gives birth to be with her child. And if she does, that's her choice. But it shouldn't be that is what happens, because when you come back 3 years later, when all of your co-workers have already excelled, you go back to the bottom of the totem pole and you become absolutely devastated and depressed. And a lot of these things has to also be in partnership with the mental health and the physical well-being and the mental well-being of the workforce, which is overwhelmed and exhausted at the moment. There is no bigger, I think, informative level of understanding, no stronger reminder than the COVID pandemic and how it absolutely devastated women, because of the fact that not only did they have their work to deal with, but also childcare and home care and everything else, because of the fact that they had to figure it all out. And the amount of depression, anxiety, and really a low level of self-esteem is now in its highest for the women in the workforce. So we have a lot of work to do on so many different levels. I wish there was just one answer. It really is a collective work from all different forces to come forth, and we need to meet together rather than work in silos, because when you are non-collaborative, you just will never move the needle.
So I think I have 3 suggestions. One is training. And I'm hopeful that training of the next generation of leaders in science and medicine, this is where I think I have the most hope for. And I'm seeing this really starting with our graduate students, medical trainees, that the more we can normalize sex and gender inclusion, sex-based analyses, the concepts that sex influences health across our lifespan, the more we can ingrain that in our trainees and have them be exposed to these methodologies early in their careers, I think will be very beneficial. The second one, I think we've kind of touched upon already, is economic investments in sex and gender-based research. So specific targeted funding in areas that disproportionately affect women by, either by sex and or gender-based influences. And then third, I think is really also the culture of science and medicine that we haven't talked about, is publishing and how research findings get highlighted, disseminated, and shared with our global community is really based on publications and journals and these editors of very high profile medical journals. And so often women's health research or work that focuses specifically on women's health gets relegated to lower tier academic journals or places where that work won't be as visible. So I think raising the profile of who is editing these journals and selecting these articles for review and publication is very important.
And I'll just add two things. I mean, I think one, federal dollars are important, and that investment, per one of the comments that was in the chat. And from a maternity perspective, our outcomes are just, bringing those dollars to this space right now, based on the fact that, our C-section rate has increased 500% since 1970. And, a Black woman is 3 times more likely to die during childbirth, irrespective of income and education level, right? So, if nothing else, these really surface that there's a need for change here. And I think that's bringing dollars, at least in the direction of maternity. And so when we think about expanding that to other areas of women's health, right, what are those statistics? And of course, some of the research of, others on the panel here, right, to really bring that to light and bring those dollars to that space. The second piece, I think, is just innovation. And Roxanna, you mentioned in terms of return to work and support there, right? And we know that right now, especially with COVID, women are leaving the workforce in droves because of all the other responsibilities that they are taking on at home disproportionately versus their partners. And so because of that, what are opportunities that we have? And, even from the Maven perspective, return to work is a big part of our offering as we do work with employers and think about the gaps that we can address in these areas, given the fact that there, isn't mandated parental leave in the United States. And, what are the ways that employers can at least step in and fill those voids in the interim to support working parents and ultimately retain their workforce, which has, economic impact to them as well.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm seeing a lot of comments pop up in the chat about various training programs that are available that are starting to focus on gender or sex, both in the workforce and then in research. And it seems like there's a general push to try and make more awareness that, I think, as some of us have said before, women are not just small men. But maybe, we have a few minutes left, maybe to just sort of wrap up our conversation. What are the best ways to get the word out that there is a disparity? I think we've talked about medical journals, and that's for a certain class of researcher, a certain class of reader. But what are your organizations doing to also let the general public know that this is an issue, so that it can become elevated to a national level, it could become a legislative level? Are you on Facebook, or what's the channel that you use to generally address the public?
I work very closely with my university's press office and trying to be in front of the media at any opportunity to talk about this. I think particularly, I know that folks, as I mentioned before, might be aware of the differences in women's health research in clinical trials. But again, as I mentioned, a lot of people don't know that this starts so early on in our pipeline with cells and animals. So any opportunity I have to talk to the press, to talk to the media, to just share this information, to make people more aware of it, that is one of my biggest strategies. And then also talking to our elected officials and making sure that they're aware of how their constituents are represented in biomedical research. So I think those are the two avenues that I take personally to advocate for women's health research. And I'm interested to hear what others do to share and spread the word.
Well, Nicole, I try to do exactly the same, more on the clinical front, obviously, as I'm not a biomedical scientist, but I share your pain. And I believe that, and I wholeheartedly believe that it starts at the bench and with cells and animals. And we've discussed this in our Lancet Commission, that almost all of the research is done in animal models that are males. And so even the preclinical work is not really exemplifying what you want to do for your clinical work, which is really the fundamental basis of scientific research that starts at the bench and then it's brought to the bedside through its translation. So what am I doing? We're on our Women as One for the organization regarding promoting the workforce and actually thinking about women. We also have to think about the underrepresented minorities, the fact that Hispanics and Blacks make up a very, very small percentage of the workforce that cares for these patients who are, by the way, by 2050, America, the United States, whites will be minorities. I mean, we will not be the majority. of the population. The census has shown this incredible rise in the number of Latinas and Hispanics in this country, and the people of color. And as I said in the opening sessions of the American Heart Association, with our NIH director on the line, as well as so many other Institute of Medicine director, all on the line on that panel, I said, this is a colorful world, and we must make sure that our workforce is not just a boring white color, that we also need to be a colorful workforce so that we could care for these patients in the right way. So we're on the workforce, we're doing that. In terms of the clinical research, we absolutely need to do this collectively, not in silos. So if we're working on the clinical research group, we need to take our entrepreneurs to also say, we will not be funding research or funding startups that are just working on male-related issues or have done all of their work. And in fact, what we would like to see is that we work with our biomedical scientists, and then as a united front, go in front of legislation and in front of our lawmakers to say, you know, there has to be something more than just some legislation that no one is actually checking up on. If you're giving a grant to someone who's now enrolling 95% white males, you cannot keep funding that organization. And there has to be some sticks and carrots here to be able to change, to make those important changes. So our organization is on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and everywhere. We're in everyone's faces, but we can't do this alone. We just cannot do this alone. We need all of us to kind of come together. I mean, it's such a wonderful, I'm so pleased that I was able to actually be part of this panel. I almost missed it because of another engagement. And I'm so glad. This is my most important priority. And it's just so wonderful to hear the words of Nicole and Krista and to see this kind of, honestly, it's bringing tears to my eyes thinking about this, that we absolutely have to make change. The time is now, and our opportunity is ours. And if we don't do this now, I don't know that when we're going to do this, because after the issues about the Me Too movement, everyone started to think about the workforce. And it shouldn't be those ugly, horrible things that makes us think about this. We shouldn't be reactive, but proactive. And this is our opportunity. So I hope we can all come together as a united front. And that's why we called our organization As One. And we need to take women out and be called as one to be able to go forward and make an important progress on it.
I love the passion that you bring, that all of you bring to this subject. And I can see again in the chat that there's a lot of interest in supporting women's health research, and there's a lot of interest in becoming involved. And then also in funding our entrepreneurs who are focusing on Femtech, which of course we'll hear from more of today. I think we're unfortunately just about out of time, and I want to just thank you all for sharing with us everything that you're working on, for sharing with us your perspectives. I know that there's ongoing opportunities to become involved and to work together. So I know Nikki has dropped the Women's Health Access Matters link into the chat. If there's other resources that you want to share, please do. Both the panelists and our audience, share them with each other in the chat and become more educated about all the different opportunities there are to get involved with promoting women's health research. So with that, I'll thank you all, and I hope that this was a valuable conversation both for our panelists and for all of our participants. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
My pleasure. And so we're going to move on to another set of startup presentations. So I'm hoping that we can get that video started. Yep. So I'm happy to introduce that we have another 8 startup videos to watch. And there will also be a QR code that is going to be launched after this in case anyone will want to have one-on-one meetings with any of the founders.
I'm Gora Conley, and I'm the co-founder of Anaida Technologies. To make it simple, our mission is to help people in making babies. Turns out that the old-fashioned way doesn't always work out, and this is a growing problem. Already 1 in 10 couples have to turn to alternatives like in vitro fertilization. And a crucial aspect in getting that success the first time lies in the doctor's ability to choose the right embryo for transfer. And that's where we come in. We're developing a device that will enable doctors to choose the right embryo as soon as possible. The device can detect the metabolic fingerprint of individual embryos without even touching them. All the doctor has to do is place multiple embryos from the same patient inside this device, connect it to a machine for analysis, and get back a simple result, which is the embryos scored for viability. In April last year, we closed our seed financing rounds, 1 million francs. More recently, we were awarded an EU grant for nearly double of our seed round. If you want to know more and might be interested in joining us for the next round, please get in touch with me. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Andrea Bornos with Aspivix, a medical device company in women's health with a vision to make gynecology now modern. Our first product is a solution to a real problem in gynecology, the Tenaculum. It affects more than 80 million women every year in common office-based procedures. It was invented over a century ago and is very effective because the hooks at the end pierce the cervix in order to stabilize it, causing significant pain and significant bleeding. Our new device, MeetCareVix, is a next generation cervical device that uses suction technology to secure the cervix without compromising on performance. Our current clinical trial in 2 university centers in Switzerland are showing very robust results. And here you can see how the device gently attaches to the cervix without causing pain or bleeding. We are currently fundraising Series A, 5 million Swiss francs to fund our commercial launch in the US and in Europe. Thank you very much. Please come talk to us if you would like to know more.
Hi, my name is Lisa, and we brought a team together and developed Brief Idle. Brief Idle works if a woman needs to breathe 60 seconds into the device per day, and then the data is transferred via Bluetooth to the Brief Idle app. She gets her fertility status and her cycle phase displayed in the app. On the one side, you can buy Brief Idle once, or we have also the renting model, which has recurring revenues. The woman can do so via our own online shop or also via professionals in Austria. We work here with all pharmacies. Additionally, we are also working with insurance groups. So we have several thousand users within the German-speaking area, and we have a 5 times revenue growth over the last year. We are also working on other applications, for example, in the COPD monitoring, as well as we want to go into the sports diagnostics for women in the later stage. So if you are interested, please reach out to me or the team, and thank you for your attention.
My name is Elizabeth Gaza. I'm the CEO of Ember Labs. By 2025, there will be 1.1 billion women in menopause. They will suffer from hot flashes, insomnia, anxiety, and brain fog. Today, women are spending about $2,000 a year out of pocket for partial solutions. What we've done is discovered a new pathway to the brain using temperature as a messenger to balance the autonomic nervous system. We apply thermal energy to the inside of the wrist. It triggers the brain to balance the autonomic nervous system and dampen down menopausal symptoms without any medicine or side effects. We partnered with Johnson & Johnson to prove out the efficacy of the device. In all cases, we were able to move these clinical measures in ways that drugs to this point have only addressed. By the end of 2022, we will be able to predict an hot flash before it starts and kick the device into operation. We are also on our way to have a signed partnership with a major global CPG brand. And to date, we've sold over 77,000 units. Thank you.
Hello, this is Katarina from Physimen. More than 1 out of 10 women worldwide suffer from urinary leaks, most of them being younger than the age of 55. The pelvic floor maintains like a hammock the genital organs. It is important for women to train their pelvic floor all over their life to improve bladder control and to stop and prevent incontinence or organ descending. It provides a suitable solution to strengthen the pelvic floor at home. It consists of an intravaginal device connected to a smart mobile application. Kegel exercises are all based on therapeutic training schemes. An innovative biofeedback technology that was developed and patented by Physimen. The device is classified as a medical device class 1 and meets highest medical quality standards. We sell EMI in all countries within Europe, in different countries in Asia, and also in North America. Please reach out to me or with our CEO, Emmeline Hahn, we are linked.
Bio developed a small, smart, and disposable vaginal platform that is used like a tampon with an applicator. But it functions like a menstrual cup where it collects any vaginal secretion for 12 hours. These liquids are then used for monitoring and screening of women's health based on biomarkers available within that fluids. Gal's Bio first device, Tulipon, is a superior hygiene device that for the first time ever enables users to monitor the volume of their blood loss, which is also another indication of health. Tulipon is fully operational after being tested for more than a year as part of a post-market study. The next step is to be transferred to a mass productions and sell. Thank you.
Vaginitis is the most common gynecologic problem encountered by primary care providers for women. However, it is misdiagnosed in 50% of first clinic visits. Guide tools devised Genie, the first and only accurate, rapid, and cost-effective point-of-care diagnostic system that is based on machine learning and AI. Genie is addressing a multi-billion blue ocean market. We already started marketing activities in Israel and Switzerland. We are seeking an investment partner in our A round. My name is Nimrod Lev, co-founder and CEO, and I'll be happy to set a Zoom call and elaborate.
Our 15 startups for today. There should be a QR code launching in just a moment. If you're interested in investing or partnering with the Tech4Eva CEOs, you can fill out the one-to-one meeting contact form that you can find here on the QR code, and you'll be taken to or given an opportunity to meet with any of the talented CEOs to support their cause. And as we just heard from our last panel, one of the biggest challenges in women's health is to fund women's health. So if there are investors on the line, and I know there are, and any of these have met your interest areas, please do reach out and get in contact. And that is a segue into our next speaker and our next panel. It's my pleasure to introduce another special guest who's visiting us here at Swissnex today. Andrei Kudelski is the chairman of the Kudelski Group, and also chairman and CEO of the Kudelski Group, and also the chairman of the board at the Swiss innovation agency, InnoSwiss. I'll hand over the floor to Andrei Kudelski.
Thank you. So good afternoon, good morning for the ones that are in the US. It's really a privilege to address a few elements to this forum. So first element that is pretty important to understand is financing is quite key, like fuel for rockets or air to breathe. It's really extremely important to get financing as a startup. Now, as InnoSwiss, we look at what is the maximum impact in terms of a startup, and financing is something that is pretty important to be looked from this angle. So when you are as a startup discussing with people that are ready to invest or not ready to invest, you have for about 30 seconds to make an impression and to convince. So you should not consider that the investors knows everything about you, or fundamentally you have to make the maximum impact in very few seconds. And for that, you should not be shy. You should not consider that you should be lucky. You should be proactive and try to make the difference by your message. And fundamentally, in Femtech, there is one thing that is important, that I will use another illustration by saying it's not because you have the head in the oven and the feet in the freezer that you are at ambient temperature. So fundamentally, when you have some differences, and especially with the new evolution of the medical tech, you have the possibility to have some things that is much more personalized. And that is making a lot of difference, but you need to make that also clear for your investors. And so fundamentally, by showing the impact that you can bring, you can really make the difference. And you don't need to convince everyone. You need to be able at least to convince one that will be ready to join you in your adventure. So good luck for the panel. You will hear few experience from this field. Thank you.
Thank you. And so with that, I think we can introduce the moderator of our next panel, which will be a discussion on finding investment in the USA and the road to IPO. I'll hand it over to Brittany Barreto of Coyote Ventures and Femtech Focus.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brittany Barreto, and I am the founder and executive director of Femtech Focus. We are a nonprofit that supports bringing the industry together and quantifying it. And I am so excited for our panel today. We have some investors, we have some founders that recently fundraised, and we're going to be talking about fundraising for your startup, but we're also going to be talking about that road to exit and when do you start thinking about it and what does that look like? So I wanted to just share very quickly some statistics on fundraising that have come to light. So we are making some progress, thank goodness, right? So here are some statistics. This is actually from Rock Health. Rock Health does a great job. They're an investor in digital health, but they also do a lot of research. And so just be mindful that these numbers are specifically for digital health. So it's not really including your med device, your CPG, but I think it does give some insight into the overall trend. Funding for women-focused digital health startups rose by 105% last year to $418 million across 22 companies. Again, all digital health apps. This is nearly twice the number from the year before. Some notable funding rounds in 2020 were Willow and Maven, as I know a lot of you heard about in the news. We also have Femtech funding on the rise just longitudinally. Funding for women's health sector represents only 7% of the total digital health funding in 2021, but that is actually an increase from previous where it was closer to 2%. So we are getting funding for female-specific health apps. This is the second highest proportion since 2011. And then some Femtech exits. This is where Femtech Focus really shines in our research. So we found, and this grows literally on a weekly basis, there's been 113 exits since 1990, with a total exit value of approximately 27 billion, with an average exit value of 301 million. That's significant because the average exit value of a tech company is 240 million. So if you're an investor and you want to get a good ROI, Femtech's the way to go. Another interesting point I want to just highlight briefly is that if a Femtech company was formed in the last 10 years, its average time to exit is actually 4 years instead of 8, which is pretty awesome, again, for ROI investors. And we have had at least 4 exited unicorns. We do have some unicorns, meaning $1 billion or more in value, that have not exited yet. And so this number is just going to keep growing. And then this is my last slide, just showing you over time that 50% of the exits in women's health have happened in the last 5 years. That's really significant. So when people say, oh, 100 exits in the last 30 years, that's not a big deal. Yeah, well, only like 3 or 4 happened in the first 15 years of that. Most of them happened in the last 5 years. So with that, I would love our panel to introduce themselves. Let me stop sharing here. So first up, we have Oriana. Would you like to please introduce yourself to the audience?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. My name is Oriana, as Brittany mentioned, and I'm the CEO and co-founder at AOA DX. We are focused on the early detection of cancer through blood-based samples. Primarily right now, our first product is in ovarian cancer. There is no diagnostic test on the market today, and unfortunately, over 80% of women are diagnosed when they're already at stage 3 and 4. So we're here to change that and develop a diagnostic test that allows us to catch the disease much sooner. And I've been in women's health myself for the last decade. I've been working with both of my co-founders for that time as well, bringing novel women's health products to market. And I've raised a seed 1 and in the process of raising a seed 2 right now.
Excellent. And we have another founder. So let's stick with the founder hats. We have Liz from Ember Labs.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm Elizabeth Gazda. I'm the CEO of Ember Labs. We produce a wearable device that uses temperature as a new pathway to the brain. If any of you have seen the new Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology that was awarded about 4 weeks ago, it's precisely around the identification of these receptors and the utilization for non-invasive and therapies without side effects. We are primarily focused on menopausal women. There are 1.1 billion women going through menopause right now with really no solution. To give you a sense of the size of this market, if you add up the 4 leading indications for men, which are prostate cancer, low testosterone, male pattern baldness, and erectile dysfunction, and you multiply that sum by 4, that equals the size of the menopausal population. So massive market. To date, we've sold well over 90,000 of these devices to consumers who just love the technology.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Alice.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on this panel. I'm really excited to be here today. I loved all the comments from the previous speakers in the last panel, and it's great to see so many familiar faces in this event as well. So I have also been in women's health throughout my career. First in global public health, I worked in East Africa and Asia in women's health issues on the nonprofit side. Then went on and became a physician, focused very much on women's health as well. I did get bit by the business bug and ended up going to business school and actually finished some clinical training and went on to spend 5 years at McKinsey, where I worked with a variety of healthcare organizations across the spectrum, and women's health was a core area of a focus of mine. And I also did a bunch of research on the industry in terms of what are the gender disparities in healthcare, as well as specific investment trends. I'm excited now to be on the venture side of things. Again, very happy to see familiar faces in terms of other investors and startups that I've gotten to know over the past number of years.
And go ahead.
Yep. I think we'll be introducing Rhea Ventures a little bit later, but just a quick preview is that we focus on mostly reproductive health conditions, also other areas of women's health. We are a seed stage, Series A and sometimes Series B investor, and really excited about solutions in particular that are looking to serve underserved communities. So that's BIPOC populations, low income, and Medicaid.
Great. Yeah. And sticking on that investor train, Emmy, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for having me in the panel. I'm super excited to be here around such amazing and kick-ass women. I'm a partner at Ataraxia, where we invest in living longer and living better. We are a global fund, so we invest in the US, Europe, and a little bit in Asia. We are really active also in the women's health side of things. We invest, we have 2 portfolio companies. We have Oriana's AOAs and Liz's company, Ember Labs, or portfolio company of ours. So we're very, very active, investing anywhere from the beginning, sexual health and wellness, to all the way to menopause and the full spectrum of a woman's life. I've been with the fund for about 2 years. I'm based here in Boston, and I'm super excited to tell you all more about my experience and all of our experiences together in the women's health side of things.
Awesome. Well, we have so many founders here, and I'm sure a lot of them are thinking, will they fund me? So can we please, Emmy and Alice, tell us, what do you invest in specifically, down to the stage, the product type, and maybe what the specific thing they're addressing is?
Awesome. So at Ataraxia, so we have 2 funds. We have Joyance Partners, where we invest in delightful moments. And the second fund is the Social Starts class of funds, where we invest in the science of health and happiness. For both funds, we invest very much from pre-seed all the way up to A as our first check. And so, that can compose of from pre-product. So we invested in May, which is kind of a women's health platform for maternal health platform for expecting mothers, especially targeting the Black population, all the way up to commercial stage companies. Ember Labs is one of them. And so we really invest, if we want to invest in pre-seed, for example, we really need high conviction of the team, where they have really high expertise in the team, really unique proposition in terms of the technology or their go-to-market strategy. As a fund, as I said, we've invested very, very heavily in women's health side of things. And so for us, really, we want something that is really well thought out, a very strong founding team, and a really distinct and differentiated kind of technology for us.
All right. And Alice, quick pitch. What does RIA look for investing?
Yep. Yeah. So RIA Ventures is one of the 6 or 7 fully dedicated women's health funds, which is really exciting because in the past, 2 or 3 years, a number of these have been started. Before that, there really weren't any. So RIA focuses on, as I mentioned earlier, mostly reproductive health. So our portfolio is quite heavy in contraception and maternal health to date. And we are actually exploring beyond that as well. We do have a company in our portfolio, TestMe, which spoke earlier in the STI testing space. In terms of the sectors, we actually very broad in that sense. So we spend a lot of time looking at life science companies. So that's, diagnostics, therapeutics, and devices that are regulated, prescription-based, pre-revenue for a long time because of the development timelines. We like a lot of those types of companies. We also do invest in digital health, consumer as well. So while we're very narrow in our topic area in terms of women's health areas, we are actually very broad in terms of sectors. In terms of our check size, we invest on the lower end, $250,000 to $500,000 at the seed stage, and up to $1 million, let's say, for Series A. And we always reserve for follow-on, and we're excited to partner with companies as they continue to grow. One other thing to note that is unique about RIA, as mentioned earlier, we do have an impact focus. So that's also something that does set us apart from the other women's health funds. We are really excited, as mentioned, about opportunities to really affect populations that are currently overlooked and underserved. So if you have a Medicaid strategy, we would love to talk to you. If you're looking to serve BIPOC communities and reduce health inequities in the system, also excited to chat.
Amazing. Oriana and Liz, we'd love to know, how much have you fundraised and from who have you mostly fundraised from? Is it angels, venture, corporate venture? So Liz, why don't you go first?
Yes, to date, Ember has raised about $35 million. Most recently, that's been our biggest round, which is a B1 round at 20 million. And there's been an evolution actually in the type of investors that we've attracted. Early days, we had a couple of corporates take a bet on us because it was technology that would take a while to develop. We are a hardware company. Maybe you've heard this said, hardware is very hard. And so the investors that paid attention to us were Intel Capital at the first instance and Bose Ventures. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with the Bose headphones. They have a really great venture team. And recently, Bose has really pushed into health and digital health, much more looking at things like hearing aids, low-cost hearing aids. So it was really 2 corporates and their venture arm that got the company off the ground. And then early on, it was smaller angels, individuals in that first round. And we really started to be taken seriously when we raised our Series B. And that's when we started to get actually institutional investors in the form of venture capitalists that were now very interested in digital therapeutics. So we went from being seen as a hardware company, kind of a gadget, to a digital therapeutic. And that was a big transition for us. So a couple of institutional investors like Joyance with Emmy's team, Digitex in Silicon Valley, and Safar Partners out of New York and Boston. In this last round, what we found was we were kind of at a gawky adolescent stage between a B and a C. And what we found there is that the investors that were most interested in helping us were what you would call non-traditional investors. And we see a lot more of these investors coming into venture investing. These are companies, either family offices or investors that have traditionally been in other areas such as real estate. So that's who led our last round, is a non-traditional investor. We have had recently a lot of interest also, again, from corporates. And Brittany will talk a little bit about that when we start to talk about exits.
Excellent. So excited. And Oriana, tell us how much have you raised and what's the profile of the investor?
Yep. So we're still in our early days. We raised a seed 1 earlier this year. We raised $2.5 million. We're in the process of raising our seed 2. We went out to the markets to raise $4 million. We're projecting to be a little oversubscribed, so should be closing on that soon. In our first round, predominantly angels in both sort of high net worth individuals as well as angel groups, and a few early stage VCs that invested in either in women's health or in diagnostics. And what we're seeing in our seed 2 is that the majority of our early stage VCs that invested in our seed 1 are reinvesting in our seed 2, as well as we're bringing on more angel groups and more early stage VCs as well. And we haven't worked with any corporates as of yet.
Excellent. We have some rock stars up here. This is so great. Alice, I want to ask you a question. Women's health is becoming a hot industry globally, which I'm very proud of. You and I've been working in this space when people still thought Femtech meant female founder or FinTech or whatever. So we've seen it grow. But are you seeing other funds and angel groups that haven't traditionally invested in women's health starting to put money into the space? And do you think there's potential negative consequences of that, of people who aren't familiar with the space starting to now put their money into it?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's very exciting to see the growth. There's, as I mentioned, there's a handful of women's health dedicated funds, but we absolutely need others to be investing in the space. And what's really exciting is that, if you think back 5 years ago, there were, individual partners at certain funds that were leading investments in women's health, but not so much with a dedicated strategy. Today, we see a lot more excitement. So there's angel groups that focus a lot on female founders, which has huge overlap with women's health, given that majority of women's health companies have at least one female co-founder compared to a fraction in the rest of startups. So that's on one end. And on the other end, in terms of later stage investors or just bigger mainstream funds, we are seeing dedicated teams, not 100% time focused on women's health, but the fact that there are teams where we as a specialized investor will have regular touch points with these other funds, that's really exciting to see. And so, for example, at, big funds like NEA, GV, formerly known as Google Ventures, the fact that they have folks covering women's health is exciting. And one of my most surprising conversations that I've had was I spoke with the women's health lead at Goldman Sachs. Now, my husband used to work there way back when in his early career, and I never thought I would ever have a conversation with Goldman Sachs about women's health because, 3-4 years ago, I've talked to other kind of, late stage and PE funds who said, Femtech, that's a word that, that sounds a bit too progressive for us. Literally that was said to me a number of years ago, but now things have changed where, everyone is paying attention. And again, these mainstream funds are putting resources against the space, which is super exciting.
So exciting. Get more money in the industry. Emmy, where are you seeing geographically Femtech deals coming from? Is there specific continents that are or countries showing you more deal flow? And also, if you are not, if founders here are non-US based, do they need to come to the US to get funding?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting question. Ourselves, as I said, we are a global fund, but we do have geographically 2 continents that we focus on. One is North America and the second one is Europe. And so I think as a product of that, there may be some prejudice that comes in where the majority of our companies comes in from the US and in Europe. What I've seen specifically is that in the European companies, I've seen a lot more very, very early stage companies, a lot of pre-seed companies coming up from Europe. And that for me is like a very big indicator. This is just a prediction of mine that Europe is going to be a very big central hub to women's health. And so that's something that I've seen kind of in the past, maybe year and a half of this like immense propensity of very early pre-seed stage companies in the women's health side of things. And I don't believe you do need to come to the US for investment for multiple reasons. One, the European market is huge and can also expand to other geographical areas such as Asia. Asia is a huge unmet need right now. that I think it needs to be targeted. And so there are other types of markets that don't need the US in order to be able to fundraise. In terms of investors, and that other perspective is that there are a growing number of European venture funds that I've seen being focused and interested in women's health. And so, there's also US funds that are expanding and building hubs in Europe as well. And so I think this kind of all culminates into idea that you don't need US investors to be successful, and you don't need to enter the US market either in order to be successful.
Cool. And then from the founder's point of view, do you, Liz and Oriana, do you have international investors?
Yes.
We both do. Cool. All right. Well, Liz, tell us, how did you find them, or did they find you? And what's it like having an international investor compared to one in the same country?
We have one international investor out of Israel. They found us, which was great. I would say that there's really no difference in my mind other than what you feel is cultural sometimes when it comes to things like negotiation or relationship building. One thing to consider when you do take money from abroad is how are you going to manage that relationship if, for example, there's board participation. If you have an international investor on a different time zone, are you going to be expected to accommodate that investor in business hours or not? So when we had an investor from Israel come onto our board as an observer, we made it very clear that because we had a distribution of investors across the US time zone, that yes, you can attend our board meetings, but you're going to have to do it in your evening. It sounds like a very stupid, small thing, but people's feathers get ruffled when it comes to small issues like that.
Good boundaries ahead of time. I love it. Setting the stage ahead of time. And Oriana, what's it been like for you? Did they find you? You found them, and what's it like working with them?
A very similar experience. So we have a number of international investors ranging from Europe and the Middle East, Asia even. Similarly, they reached out to us. So we've been a part of a few accelerators, and that has brought us a lot of investor interest as well. And similarly, I think there are nuances when it comes to negotiations. But in terms of really like deal structure, investor agreements, term sheets, I see it being very universal. We prepare everything in the US with our US counsel, but everything, translates to similar deal structures internationally as well.
Cool. Well, Oriana, actually, I'm going to stick with you. So you actually have some statistics on which investors actually converted into investing in you based on if it was you met them through a warm introduction or a cold one. Please tell our audience what's a warm introduction in case anyone doesn't know, and then tell us what was the different ratios there.
Absolutely. So warm introduction is somebody introduced you to somebody. I have a perfect example. Liz introduced me to Joyance, and then they invested in us in our seed one. Or a cold outreach is I've identified a fund and I either applied through their online portal or I reached out to somebody on LinkedIn. I didn't know anybody that could personally give me an introduction. I think there was a third category, and I don't know where to put them, which is when somebody contacts you. And so excluding those of all the investors that I had a warm intro to versus I had a cold outreach, and everybody that ended up investing, of all of our investors, 90% came from warm introductions and 10% came from cold intros. So I would say significantly more when somebody introduced me to an investor.
Wow. And Liz, can you back that up? Is that something similar for you? And what would you recommend to founders here looking to fundraise?
I would say it's very similar. It's probably a 90 to 10 ratio in terms of warm introduction to cold, or just cold outreach. I think there's one exception, which may be participation in accelerators. So they're, I don't know how you would describe that, but
exactly.
Maybe like institutional introduction, but we've had a really great exposure through the different accelerators we've done, which includes Tech4Eva, but also Plug and Play, and some of the Massachusetts based ones here. So
I second that very much so. I think for us, likewise, I think there's that third category, which is when investors reach out to you either from your press or what you've been doing, or from another investor mentioning you, or from an accelerator. And we likewise participated in some great accelerators over the last year and have seen a lot of success in terms of inbound requests to us from investors.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And getting into the accelerator, did you need a warm intro there, or you cold apply to accelerators?
I've done both.
I've done both.
Cool. Mm-hmm. Because if we think about democratizing who gets investment, if it's just based on people who know people, that might limit folks who aren't in the investment community. But maybe accelerators, because they accept cold applications, that could be one way we're democratizing it. Emmy and Alice, how do y'all like to be reached out to by founders? And what's a number one, please don't do this, or stop doing it? And what's your number one, please do this? Emmy, why don't you go first?
Of course, I'm happy to. So one of our main initiatives as a fund is really democratizing access to capital and to, funding other founders. We understand that networking isn't easy. We understand that there is, a lot of logistical and other types of barriers, social barriers that kind of prevent very much facilitating that network. I think with that thread, I do read every single email that comes to me, and I try to go through every single deck as possible. If there's something that's truly captivating about the founder, their message, the idea, the business model, or the technology, I take a meeting, no matter if it's a cold outreach. However, very realistically, I also get a ton of inbound, and getting inbound from other investors as well helps me mentally sort different types of categories and buckets. And so, we're very active on the women's health side of things, and people know that about our fund. And so for me, it's a reality that getting a warm intro to me allows me to take a second look into the company that's being introduced to me. And so for me, getting an inbound is something that, again, I've gotten an inbound from founders as well, even portfolio companies of ours, have introduced companies to ours. So I'm not just talking about inbound within other investors, but just within my network of people, right? And relationships that I've built throughout my professional career. And so getting introductions from founders, portfolio companies, other accelerators that I've worked with is really, really helpful. And something that I think allows me to take that second look and decide whether or not I want to take that meeting, given that there's only 24 hours in the day. I wish I could take meetings with everyone, but the reality is that I can't.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, we take inbound from all sources, cold outreach. We have a pitch form directly on our website that also specifies areas that we care about a lot, such as the impact piece, which may or may not be highlighted in most pitch decks. So those are some cold methods, also through networks, through other investors, through our portfolio companies. We welcome all. Now, since we have a pretty specific focus area, that does help us a lot with, figuring out what's in scope and out of scope, since again, reproductive health is the core, and then other women's health areas. And so, we will screen out some companies that, either don't fit that criteria or don't have any impact focus that matches our focus areas. But otherwise, we actually are very attentive around making sure to always get back in touch, giving feedback if it's not a good fit, and taking a call. It could just be 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be a very long time, but we want to really respect people's efforts and times. And to the point about democratization, the reality is, there is a lot of warm introductions that are being done that do help, but we think a lot about the fact that not everyone has those networks, maybe geographically or for other reasons. And we do pay attention to that, even though the current reality is that warm introductions work very well.
Yeah. And so I'd like to jump into talking about exiting your company. And audience, please drop your questions in the chat if you have any, and I will ask them. But I'd love to just keep this conversation going. Let's go to the second half in the last 5 minutes we have. I know it's like crazy time. But what is an exit strategy? So Liz, can you tell us what's an exit strategy?
Yes, it's really, as a founder or a leader of a company, to think about how to potentially make your investors whole and your employees, and leaving the company in the hands of somebody who really sees its value. So exiting can take many different forms. The one that is very attractive to a lot of founders is an acquisition. And very interesting for me is when we started this journey together, looking at Ember Labs, we initially thought that maybe a potential acquirer would be a traditional pharmaceutical company that may want to bundle a device with a therapeutic. But more and more, we're seeing a kind of consumerization of healthcare. And so we've been approached by a lot of CPG companies in spaces that we could have never have anticipated taking an interest in Ember Labs. So we're talking about everything from fashion companies to skincare. So you never know where things are going to go, and who sees you as valuable and why.
Well, it sounds like that has been a big shift. And if that's the case, do early stage startups still need to have an exit strategy? Oriana, your early stage, seed stage, do you have an exit strategy? Do you get asked about that?
We do. From very first conversations, especially with more institutional investors, and I'm referring to sort of organized, reputable angel groups and early stage VCs, it is definitely a question that comes up. And in my experience, what I have sensed from our investors is that they want to know that we're thinking about it, and they want to know how we are thinking about it. We certainly have our exit strategy goals, but there are multiple iterations of them. And in terms of, realistic timeframes, ranges again, and the vision overall, because, I think your investors want to know that they're aligned with you on the long run. I haven't had the experience where somebody's expecting me to have had conversations with strategics or to know exactly who's going to acquire me or at what value or exactly when, but much more, they want to know how I'm thinking from the early stages and understand, is that thinking compatible with their investment thesis? And I think, as founders, that should be just as important to you as it is to the investor. Is this the right investor for you? Are they looking for a quick exit, or are they looking for an IPO? Because that is such a big difference. And if you're not within the realm of the same page, it can cause you a lot of friction down the line.
Alice, do you agree with that? Is that what you're looking for in founders?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a couple thoughts here is, as an investor, I definitely love to know that companies are thinking about it. And it's not that you have to have a strategy, like you're trying to, get there near term or you're predicting the future. It's that there's potential for an exit. There's examples you can point to, and you have some thoughts around when you might want to exit, like what are the milestones that you might reach. Again, can't predict the future, but there are certain time points that will work well. And if you even do have a list of, not, again, to Oriana's point, not that you talk to acquirers, but that you have some thoughts in your mind about what the major buckets are, that's great. We actually did have a company exit recently, Ovia, which is a digital health platform for pregnancy. And they exited to an unlikely one that no one would have predicted. It was actually with LabCorp, the lab testing company. And again, that wasn't necessarily in their pitch deck as the exit, but they had others that they were thinking about. And the other reality for investors is that, we are thinking about that too, even at, very early stage investing. We need to run our numbers to see if the investment makes financial sense for us. And so we'll do our own thinking, but it's always great to know how the founders are thinking about it.
Emmy, has anyone in your portfolio exited?
Not yet. I think we have had some acquisition offers, but no, I think our companies are running really strong. As I said, most of them kind of fall within the pre-seed all the way up to seed stage right now. And they're growing tremendously to date. And I think that some of them will soon come.
Excellent. Well, we have two questions that dropped in the chat real quick here. So one of them is, how much do early conversations with investors focus on diversification? Maybe this founder has a single product and maybe you as an investor want a whole product line. Is that something you talk about with seed stage companies, or?
I get asked, I can just.
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
I get asked, what else could there be? So especially for us, like, is ovarian cancer your only product, or could there be more in the pipeline? Again, it's not, are you actively working on it, but does your technology and your IP allow you the opportunity to expand? Yeah. And having worked at two previous startups to this that were single product, never had anything else in the pipeline, that were very niche, I don't necessarily think it's a requirement. But again, like, does it fit the fund's thesis and does it match what they're looking for?
Because Liz, you only have the Ember Labs, the bracelet, right?
We do, but we are able to license the waveforms for different therapeutic applications. So, for example, we just finished a landmark study on hot flashes in men undergoing prostate cancer treatment. We never, we're a direct-to-consumer company, but we can license those waveforms to pharma to take that to market.
Excellent. The
platforms are exciting. Platforms, technologies
excited.
that can be applied elsewhere is always exciting.
Absolutely. One last question here, and then we'll wrap it up. Bethany asked, is there anything on the legal side that you wish startups knew prior to seeking investment? And I'll pose this to the founders. Is there anything that you wish someone told you legal that before you started fundraising? Alice, why don't you start?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's good to engage, legal counsel early, especially as you set your company's documents, as you talk with investors. Let me turn over actually to others as well.
Okay.
I'll go next because I have to run actually to an investor call. And rule number 1 is never be late for an investor call. But one thing, if you're a founder, always think about the concept of freedom to operate when it comes to IP protection. So have a good IP lawyer that's able to convince your investors that you have freedom to operate. You will undergo those analyses, especially from institutional investors. And I'm sorry I have to run, but Brittany, thank you so much. Alice, Emmy, great to see you. Oriana, thank you so much.
Go get that funding.
Okay, bye-bye.
Oriana, what are you something in the legal category you wish someone told you before you started fundraising?
Don't underestimate how long it takes to get through legal. So I don't think there was like a certain clause, or a certain term or certain terminology. But especially when you're going through negotiations, there's an investor, and then there's you, and then there's the investors council, and then there's your council, and then there's perhaps a board in there. There's the syndicate, and so there's a lot of people that are involved. So don't underestimate the amount of time and process to manage all of that.
Absolutely. And Emmy, what's a final thing that you wish that founders knew ahead of time?
I think lawyers there can help really make sure things are done properly. So make sure all your founding documents are in place, kind of incorporation documents, cap tables, although they're not very helpful there, but cap tables, make sure that they're helpful in terms of terms, unexpected terms for investors. Make sure that you're aware of those terms before coming into those meetings, and you're like, what is this? What does this mean? So I think just being very well versed in terms of different types of terminology that can appear in a term sheet. And so that way you're very well prepared in these negotiations coming in.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, panel. This has been awesome. I know we ran through it, but how can you fit fundraising and exit in that short time? So I think we did as good as we can. And we're so grateful for Tech4Eva for being such a fantastic platform for Femtech founders. And I will turn it back over.
Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I can't imagine fitting more into 2 hours than we just fit into 2 hours. But as it is, the time has come to an end, and we just have a few closing words to say. There will be coming up a few ways to follow Tech4Eva and keep in touch. This is not the end of the journey. It's the start of the conversation, although it is the end of the roadshow. So you can follow Tech4Eva in multiple different ways. You should also be aware that there are other events coming up. So this was the end of the roadshow, but there are other opportunities to engage with the community through focus group activities. So you can see that there are 3 coming up very shortly. If any of those are interesting to you, get in touch with Tech4Eva, look at the website, and join those panels. And then finally, last but not least, there will be a closing ceremony on December 7th. It's taking place partly in Switzerland in person. But for those of you who are joining from around the world, there is an afternoon session that will be virtual, and you are welcome to join that. This will be a celebration and a closing ceremony for the current cohort of Tech4Eva startups. There may also be a little announcement about next year's program, so stay tuned or join in December to learn more about how you can continue to be part of Tech4Eva. With that, it's time to close down our conversation for today. I want to thank everyone again for their participation. Thank you to the audience, to our wonderful panelists, to our sponsors and our partners. It has been a great pleasure, and I hope that the conversation will continue long after today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for all the effort they have been put in place this wonderful event. Thank you. Thank you from Switzerland.